Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Met. It's a great way to kick off Asia Week, and we're very honoured to have our special speaker here this evening. As many of you all know, I recognise a lot of the faces from last year. This is our second annual lecture dedicated to the arts of India and Southeast Asia. We intend to sustain these lectures year on as part of our contribution to Asia Week, and an opportunity, I think, for people to get together with a shared interest in this field and to build a South and Southeast Asian arts community, if you like, around our collections here and around the Met. I think as a national institution, in a sense, we have a role to play in providing a focal point for people with these shared interests in this way. So for the lecture series of lectures with cutting-edge research is a way in which we can give something to the broader community of people interested in this field. The lecture series itself is again sponsored by Jeff Soref and Paul Lombardi. We're very much indebted to their support. To support this lecture series is to go on the endowment, not an endowment, but for some time, which will allow us to continue this program into the future. As I mentioned, we're very much concerned to have speakers who present new material, to present new objects or new research on well-known objects, and to introduce the cutting-edge research that's taking place in the South Asian field particularly. Our speaker this evening is Professor Dr. Oskar von Hinüber, eminent Indologist, known to some of you with more specialist interest in Buddhist studies, particularly Pali studies. He's well known in the world of Pali and Sanskrit studies in the Buddhist realm. For many years, he held the chair of Indic Studies at the University of Freiburg, as elected member of both the German and the French academies, and a board member of the Pali Text Society in London, a very esteemed society which continues to produce definitive editions of Pali Buddhist literature. Professor Hinüber has published widely on Sanskrit and Pali inscriptions. His vast output over a long career has really laid the foundations for much of the work that many others follow on and build on these very, very solid foundations. He's published a collection of his Pali studies as a single volume and a handbook to Pali literature. These are very important core contributions to the field of Buddhist Pali studies. Tonight we welcome Professor Hinüber to present the second annual lecture on South and Southeast Asian art on the bronzes of the ancient kingdom of Gilgit and royal patronage in early northwest India. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this very kind introduction and for the invitation to speak here. I must confess that it came at a great surprise to me when I was asked to deliver the annual South Asia lecture in this museum, because as you have just heard, I'm not really an art historian, but rather a confessed philologist. However, when reading texts, one of my eyes is reading and the other eye is always looking for pictures in order to better understand what I am reading, and very often indeed pictures help to illustrate what the texts are saying. Therefore, we are going to look at some objects of art from the Indian subcontinent this evening, perhaps from a slightly different angle than it is used to you, shifting a bit from simply admiring the beauty of the works of art and explaining their meaning, to also emphasizing the cultural environment which produced them. So during the next hour, it is therefore my intention to make you participate in retrieving a long-forgotten royal family which donated a lot of superb works of Buddhist art. First of all, bronzes, but also a lot of drawings which are preserved on the rocks along the river Indus. To begin with, we will be looking for a moment at the geographical and cultural setting in which we are going to move. as indicated by the place name Gilgit mentioned in the title, a place perhaps not overly familiar to all of you. I'm going to talk this evening, as you can see from the place name, about a rather remote area, which you can see here on the map. You can see that we are moving in Pakistan from the inset map, and you can see in the green square where we are going to go to. This remote area in and around Gilgit became fairly well known, at least to art historians, for an ever-growing number of Buddhist bronzes coming to light during the last 2 or 3 decades. So the first question is, where is this region, which you see here in the north of Pakistan, in an area at present sadly more associated with terrorism and war, but no longer with peaceful Buddhism. In spite of the fact that I'm actually moving mostly in Pakistan this evening, I'm going to talk a lot about Indian art and Indian culture. That means that India and Pakistan, and of course part of Afghanistan as well, formed a cultural unit in ancient times, and so the word India has no political connotations at all. If I use it here, it is just a cultural term. This being said, in an abstract way about the north of Pakistan, we should approach the area now where all what is the topic of today happened about 1,500 years ago. Now today, Gilgit is part of the so-called northern areas of Pakistan. Previously in British India, this was part of the princely state of Kashmir that is outside the territory under immediate British administration. One of the prominent places of this area was and is Gilgit, a place name known already from sources about 1,000 years old, and that is very exceptional because we know almost nothing about this remote area in terms of history. The name Gilgit appears as Gita Gita, as you can see there, together with another important place name, Chilitasa, Chilas, in an ancient itinerary describing the route from Central Asia to Kashmir. So if you proceed this way down here, you get to Srinagar in Kashmir, which is approximately down there. Now, if there is an itinerary, evidently people traveled in this area in ancient times. That they did is known from early travelogues of Buddhist pilgrims who passed through this area and describes a rather frightening journey to these places, which were perhaps even less inviting than they are today 1,500 years ago. Today it looks easy to go there by plane, but weather conditions mostly don't allow that, so you have to take a road, the Karakoram highway, which allows today traveling along here. That is the Karakoram highway up to Gilgit and far beyond, as we'll see in a minute. So you can start on the Karakoram highway from Islamabad or here in Rawalpindi on the Great Trunk Road. That is a very ancient road connecting the northwest of India and of course Pakistan today to Calcutta, a road that we know was used already in pre-Christian times in antiquity. Now traveling north from Rawalpindi, the road passes after some time the place where Alexander the Great is supposed to have defeated the Indian king Poros near the Mount Aornos, which you see here. And traveling further north, the road passes after some time this place, and not too long afterwards, the road reaches finally the beginning of the Karakoram highway. This is a very long road indeed, and I think even by American standards, the distances are amazing. 7,250 kilometers right from Karachi up to Peking, so a very long road indeed. And traveling along this road, if you get through and are not held up by, I need the next one, not held up by difficulties, such as this encouraging board says, which you read there. If you are not held up by difficulties, and how difficult the road is, you can see on the left side slides that it was possible to build it only by modern technology. So after a while, you get to the place where the valleys of Tangier and Darel branch off, where a Chinese pilgrim, saw a huge Buddha statue in the 7th century. Today, these valleys are absolutely off limits and very dangerous to enter without any strong police protection, or alternatively without very good relations to the local chiefs. The state of Pakistan is not and never was very much present in these areas. At this point in Chatyal, that we are moving now to this place here. And here we see the first inscriptions and the first pictures on the rocks. The inscriptions look exciting only to the specialist. You see some inscriptions around here. There are very many. I think the picture looks exciting to everybody. It represents the future Buddha, the Bodhisattva, who donates some of his flesh in recompense for a dove that was killed. Inscriptions on this rock are in different scripts and languages, among them Sogdian inscriptions that shows that traders from Central Asia were here. More inscriptions and more images begin once we proceed further on and reach the place called Chilas, mentioned already. And here we see the first really gorgeous pictures, on which I'll come back again. These pictures were donated by my special friend, the man called Singhota, whom you see here and about whom I'm going to talk more in a minute. These pictures are immediately by the side of the Karakoram highway, which was blasted right through a group of pictures, and some of them are unfortunately lost. This is an old picture taken by Sir Aurel Stein in 1943 in summer, in the hot summer. Chilas is so hot in summer that the British called it the Devil's Stokehole. Nevertheless, Stein went there, took this photo, and when I checked this about 20 years ago, I found that this picture stood exactly where the Karakoram highway is running today. Now, beyond Chilas, one finally reaches Gilgit after another couple of hours. Gilgit became present or was seen on the map of research only since June 1931, when local people, probably digging for firewood, hit upon a real treasure and unearthed the only library extant from ancient Indian culture. A large number of mostly complete Buddhist books came to light, only to be lost immediately again and for the better part. For the local people who discovered the books did not recognize the value of their find and preferred to use these books written on birch bark. You can see a folio here, how this looks. They preferred to use these books or these birch bark for roofing their houses and simply as firewood. Certainly some of the most expensive tea ever was prepared here in Gilgit. Luckily, a considerable number of now mostly fragmentary manuscripts survived, and still more spectacular, some book covers, even painted book covers, were recovered. And these covers came to light, the first from the Indian subcontinent, when there were official excavations by the state of Kashmir in 1938. On this rather poor picture from an Indian publication, you can see that the book was found here. This is the book, and there you can even see the string that holds the thing together. The big surprise comes once you open this book, because here you see most beautifully painted pictures, two bodhisattvas to one side. You can read the names here. These are the two bodhisattvas, and two donors to the other side. These bodhisattvas are not well-known bodhisattvas. Nobody of you will probably ever have heard the name. We know their names because they are mentioned in the text, and luckily we can even tell who is who of the bodhisattvas, which is mostly not easy at all, because you see here, this one has a small flask in his hand, and the text says of one, of Bhaishatyasena, you are carrying a flask. So we can really see who is who, which is rare. It is easy in this case, but very difficult in many cases, as we shall see. On the other hand, we do not learn anything on the other two persons sitting on this side, which are, as we suspect, the donors. We see one lady clad in red and a gentleman sitting in front holding something looking like a candlestick, but that is an incense burner in one hand and a wreath in his other hand. Now, who are these two? The answer is very simple. You can read their names, Tocha Singha and Devashirika, names nobody has ever heard before, so how can we possibly know who they are? Luckily, the manuscripts found near Gilgit not only contain Buddhist texts, but at the end they have a page that is called a colophon. And a colophon is mostly a brief text added at the end of a sutra to inform the reader about the title, sometimes about the scribe and the place where the text was written, and very preciously about a date. Therefore, the colophon corresponds in many respects to the modern title page, but is always found at the end of the text. Mostly, of course, the colophons are lost because the last and the first pages are the first to go if the manuscript is fragmentary. Here we are, in this text, we are in good luck because the book was found between the covers, and we know about the scribe, and we know something very precious, that is a date. Here it says Tritiye 3, that means in the year 3, and you can even read the figure 3 without being able to read any Indian script, not by chance, because our figures are, of course, derived from the Indian figures. So evidently we have a year here. However, a naked figure 3 doesn't help you very much as long as you don't know which era it is. Now, because of the find spot of the manuscript, we can infer the era frequently used in the Northwest, and this is a system that never mentions a century. First, you have to add 24 or 25 years to get the year. In this case, you get 2728 AD, but in any century. So we have to look for additional evidence, and here the script used in the manuscript helps, and we can safely assume that this date is AD 624 or 625. The years are not running parallel to ours. Finding this date was very important because it was the first anchor in time for the Gilgit library and also for the painting. So this is a highly important date for the history of art in ancient India. That's why I have been dwelling a bit on this. Now the colophon mentions also the scribes, the donors, and 16 more persons who are either dead or alive at the time of writing. Let's go back to the donors. Prominent is the donor, or I should rather use the Latin feminine, the donatrix, because it is the lady who is the principal donor. The gentleman sitting in front of her is her husband. He is a minister, as we learn from the colophon, and he is certainly a local person because he has a very strange name. This Tucha in the beginning is not normal Sanskrit. All the other 16 persons are enumerated by name in order to share the merit made by the donation of the manuscript. It is worthwhile digging deeper into the colophons, for suddenly we are confronted with persons bearing exceptionally high-ranking titles such as Palola Shahi. You recognize at once the word Shahi, that is of course the Persian word Shah, the Iranian word king. But what or who on earth is Palola? No such dynasty was previously known from ancient India. No such name was ever mentioned in any text or inscription before this library was recovered and the colophons read. And even sometime after, nobody paid attention to it. That changed about 60 years ago when an important inscription was found and edited near Gilgit at a place called Hatun. From this inscription, we get a second date. This time it is a really exact date. The inscription is dated to Friday, 19th December 671. 1. Furthermore, we get the name of a ruler, Navasurendradityanandin. Most important, however, is that the inscription actually mentions the name Gilgit together with the name of the ruler in such a way that it connects the dynasty now to geography. For manuscripts, of course, can travel and did travel. Finding them at Gilgit does not mean that the donors were necessarily living there. One of the most important points of this inscription is that it tells us that, yes, the Palola Shahis lived in Gilgit. The real resurrection of the Palola Shahis, however, began only in 1975 when the art historian from Chicago, Pratap Pal, published his book Bronzes of Kashmir, and among these bronzes, one inscribed piece. Once the dedicatory inscription was read, a second Palola Shahi by the name which you can read here, Nandi Vikramaditya Nandi, together with his mother and one lady of his harem, came to light. And again, a very exact date, Thursday 26th or Friday 27th, April 714. It is wonderful that these pieces are dated so exactly, which is very rare. And here you can finally see a Palola Shahi. Here he is standing. Before concentrating on the Palola Shahis and their work of art, a brief word of on the rulers seems to be necessary. Taking all material we have together, we can reconstruct a series of 9 or perhaps 8 persons. So I just give you a list here. I expect you to learn it by heart in the next 2 minutes that you can follow the lecture. Now, you don't need the names. Really, it is just to give you an impression. The sequence of all these rulers is fairly certain. The dates, unfortunately, are not. Only for number 5 and 6 we have dates stretching over a longer period of time. Number 5 might have ruled as long as 27 years, perhaps even as long as 40 years. That is theoretically possible. If this is correct, this king have enjoyed probably a fairly long life. And evidently he did much to prolong his life, interestingly, because this is the only of all kings who produced lots of magic spells, which we still possess. They look like this. They are strips of birch bark on which is written, "Protect my Sri Navasurendra's lifespan, purify me from all evil." So one is really inclined to think that sometimes magic spells are really working. Now, these rulers call themselves Palola Shahis, very modestly in the beginning, and it is again number 5 who assumes the huge title which was used in central India at the time. He calls himself Highest Lord, King of Kings, Paramount Ruler, Deva Shahi Shri, so really a great title. Or he uses Shahanu Shahi, again, that is something you know from Persia. Shahan Shah is the same thing. The beginnings were modest. The first one, Somana, used a very simple title, and he uses what is, I have only Palola here, and he uses not the word Patola, but Palola with an L here, not a T. And this is certainly the original word. Now, why is this worthwhile mentioning, this change from Palola to Patola? 2 reasons. The first, it shows that the Palola, or originally Palola Shahs, Sanskritized their name, the name of their kingdom, by replacing the vernacular form by the higher Sanskrit form, the more elegant form. And this is important because it shows that in their own understanding, the Palola or Palola Shahis were not just a far away provincial dynasty, but really equal to rulers in the plains who used Sanskrit. That is also expressed in the pompous title which they assumed. The other reason is that the original form Palola confirms something very important, what has long been suspected, that Palola is a well-known place name, Bolor or Belur, a kingdom frequently mentioned in contemporary Arabic and Central Asian sources. So all this shows that they were by no means an unknown far-off dynasty, but during their times they were really participating in history, and that is also confirmed by the fact that they sent ambassadors to the Tang dynasty in China, so they were well connected. Now, obviously, the Palola Shahis were devout Buddhists. They donated manuscripts and images to worship the Buddha, among them this bronze donated in the year 90 by the king number 7. The principal donor is the king himself, who is mentioned in the inscription together with 2 ladies, but only the king is depicted here as a worshipper. The crowned Buddha holds its protective hand over the head of the worshipping king, who carries a wreath in his hand, which you can see here, and something which you cannot see here very well, but we'll see it much better in a minute, which is again an incense burner. It looks like a spoon or a ladle, so quite different from the one we have seen in the book cover, which the minister Tocha Singha holds in his hand. Now, the incense burner of Nandi Vikrama can be seen much better when he decided to offer a very spectacular and very elaborate bronze 1 year later in 715 or 16. At the side of the pedestal of the preaching Buddha, who is flanked by 2 bodhisattvas, altogether 3 donors are portraits, this time all the donors who are mentioned also in the inscription. Luckily, this inscription mentions the names of both persons accompanying the king. Behind the king kneels a lady, you can see here, with folded hand. And the inscription tells us that this queen has a rather unusual name, Namo Buddhaya. Namo Buddhaya. That means, in English, homage to the Buddha. That is the most exceptional name. To the left side kneels a second figure here, that is one minister to the king and one of his, as he is called, virtuous spiritual friends. These are friends who support the donation. Most prominent is, of course, the king himself, whom you see better here. He stands to the right of the Buddha. That is the most prominent position, and only the kings are standing. All other donors are always kneeling. His crown is the same one he was wearing when he donated a bronze a year earlier, as we have already seen. And this crown topped is by the head of an animal, most likely a lion. Even in the original, you cannot really make that out. And this lion, or whatever it is, holds a string of pearls in his teeth. The most spectacular part of the whole thing are, of course, the boots of the king. Here is the king still a bit larger. These are the most wonderful boots which are preserved from ancient India. You can see they are inlaid in all kinds of patterns, very unusual. The right hand of the king holds a fruit, and the left hand an elaborately adorned incense burner in this circle. I think you can see that. All this can be discerned in quite unusually great detail, because this is a really exquisite bronze, and it is a real masterpiece, not only aesthetically, but also as a piece of workmanship. Incense burners, such as this one, were known since a long time from Central Asia and China, and now during the last few years, similar incense burners also surfaced in the northwestern cultural area of ancient India, from archaeological find spots of unknown provenance, as deplorably is mostly the rule. And one more surfaced for myself only yesterday when I came to this museum, where you can see such an incense burner as an original. And it was only shortly before Christmas that my colleague and friend from Seattle, Richard Salomon, drew my attention to this incense burner, which is actually very similar to one of those which you can see here. And luckily, this incense burner, in contradistinction to the one in the Metropolitan Museum, is inscribed, in spite of the fact that you hardly see any inscription. So the inscription is there, so you have to believe it not really, because there is a rubbing, so to convince you that there really is an inscription. As you can see from the rubbing, it is not at all easy to read, but one can gather the more important information with some certainty. That is, first of all, a date, slightly problematic in itself, but whatever it is, however it is interpreted, the date is certainly in the brackets of the 6th century, and that confirms the dating. If you read the label here in the museum, it also says 6th century, so good luck for both of us. Important as this date is, the name of the donor is perhaps still more important, because he is called Shiladityanandin, so that doesn't mean much to you, but the names of the Palola Shahis all end in Adityanandin, and this ending Adityanandin does not occur anywhere else, so it means something if the name is construed this way. This is the name typical for the ruling family in the Palola Shahis, and consequently it may well be, if we speculate a bit, that this Shiladitya is another member of that family. The close vicinity to the Palola Shahis could also be indicated by the great similarity of this McLean incense burner, which is in Chicago, and by the one held by the Palola Shahi. Now, this incense burner was not discovered alone, but as part of a set of implements for worshipping the Buddha with dhupa and deepa, that is with incense and light. 4 candlesticks go together with the incense burner. Although these candlesticks do not look very exciting, they are in a way, for they are very clearly made to hold candles. And now this is a very commonplace statement if you see them, but it is not at all a commonplace statement in ancient India, because in ancient India exclusively oil lamps were used, and nowhere in Buddhist or classical Sanskrit literature there is any trace of a candle, nor is there, to my knowledge, any picture of a candle. So candles, which were invented rather late in Hellenistic times in Rome, slowly spread to the east, and these unspectacular looking candlesticks may well be the first trace of the candles approaching India. Now, incense burners of this type were evidently very popular during the times of the Palola Shahis, that is 6th, 7th, perhaps 8th century. For the same type was also used by the Lady Devashri, who donated a bronze together with her husband, the treasurer Shankarasena, and this you all know, of course, from the advertisement of this lecture. Again, this can be dated very exactly to the Friday, 20th April 714. The Lady Devashri is mentioned in the inscription, and she carries again an incense burner. You can see it here, a bit vaguely perhaps, but it is there. And this Lady Devashri was in fact a sister to Namo Buddhaya, the lady who was married to one of the kings. This conclusion can be drawn or results from another bronze, and this time donated by Nandi Vikramaditya's predecessor, the king number 6. Here you have this bronze, where no donor is represented, but where there is an unusually long inscription. It runs all around the pedestal. In these inscriptions, no less than 33 persons participating in the donations are named, and the initiators of this donation were the 2 chief queens. Interestingly, among these 33 persons, we find 8 noble ladies, among them again one who is later mentioned as a lady of the harem of the next king. And these 8 ladies are joined by 10 princesses, among them the sisters Devashri and Namo Buddhaya. You can see how close the family relations are here, which is quite exceptional. As 3 more women are mentioned, altogether 23 of the 33 persons involved here in this donation were women. And that is not unusual at all, for women as donors are present everywhere during the rule of the Palola Shahis, and many of them are queens. However, the family of the Palola Shahis, with all their many ladies, are by no means the only donors of Buddhist manuscripts or Buddhist bronzes. For a minister donated the text we have been talking about already, with the text with the book covers. Many more donations appear on drawings displayed on rocks along the Indus. And here we come back to a picture we have seen already. These rock drawings are parallel to the bronzes, and drawings and bronzes shed some light on each other. Here you see again the donor Singhota, we know from an inscription his name, holding again a wreath and holding again an incense burner of the same type. The devotee is identified by an inscription, and so is the Buddha next to him. Here you see the whole picture. This is the Buddha sitting there. The inscription says, "Homage to the noble Buddha Vipasshin," so we get the name of a Buddha. From this inscription we learn something very important, the name of a Buddha depicted. While concentrating on the donors so far, we have evaded the very difficult question concerning the bronzes and shared with the rock drawings, and that is the iconography. In many cases, it is highly speculative a method to determine the name of the Buddha or of a bodhisattva, a future Buddha. This is very true for our image as well, for without the inscription, any certain identification is impossible, because the Buddha we see here could be almost any Buddha. However, besides a local standard depiction of a sitting figure of a Buddha or bodhisattva, future Buddha, there is something very unusual, perhaps even unique in this representation of two Buddhas and flanked by two bodhisattvas. We shall see more of the group in a minute. And this very unusual thing, which you would not see anywhere else, are these flowers, this creeper coming out of the halo of the Buddha. Flower and creeper do not seem to be any real plant. At any rate, no botanist I asked could identify them so far. Their possible symbolic meaning in Buddhism is equally obscure. You find it only here. The second Buddha of this group, also adorned with a creeper, is sitting to the right side of the stupa. This is the whole group again, and this should be the Buddha. Yes, you see here is again a creeper. Here you see a Buddha. This time the Buddha is clad in a simple monastic robe. There is no inscription, so we cannot identify him. We would just call him a normal Shakyamuni or whatsoever. And the fourth figure of this group, a sitting figure, is to the far right of the stupa. That is this one here. And here again we get, fortunately, an inscription. It says, "Homage to Lokeshwara," name of the Buddha, together with Singhota, again the same donor, the sister Pravasa Subha, the wife Shampadharika. So the whole family is involved here. In contradistinction to the manuscripts and the bronzes, this is extremely rare that you find women mentioned in the inscriptions along the Indus in the rock drawings. The reason is very easy to guess. It is assumed with good reasons. We are thinking of the Sogdian inscriptions made by merchants in Chatyal, that these people were traveling, and travelers, of course, were men who left their women folk behind at home. Now, if this is correct, why are two ladies mentioned here? That is an obvious contradiction to what I just said. No, it is not at all, because Singhota was not traveling. But how can we possibly know that? This is very simple. We only have to look at his name, because he again has an unusual name ending in Ota. And names ending in Ota do not occur in India except in this area. So we can assume that all persons like Singhota, Dharmota, and so on, there are quite a few of them, having this particular name, lived here. And that would explain why his whole family is involved. The women were with him, of course. One more features of the two Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of this group deserve our attention. All three images have a halo, as you can see here. It is the same with all the other ones. And this was true probably for quite a few bronzes as well, in spite of the fact that none of the bronzes of the Palola Shahis has a preserved halo. The reason is easy to see. These halos were partly not fixed, but could be attached temporarily. And you see here a device where you could just fix the halo and remove it. And that is why so many halos are lost, and sometimes also halos without bronze, of course, are known. Next to the Buddha on the left side of the stupa, to get back to this group, that is Bodhisattva. Here we have again Singhota, whom we know already. Here's the Buddha Vipashin. And here we have a person standing without inscription, but this one is easily identified by the flask he carries in his hand. That is, of course, typical for the Buddha Maitreya, the next Buddha to appear in future. Now we have the Buddha Vipashin here, and we have Maitreya there. And this configuration is certainly not by chance, because the Buddha Vipashin, of whom you certainly never heard before, is the first Buddha to appear in our age, the age in which we are living, the so-called Bhadra Kalpa. The first Buddha is Vipashin, and Maitreya is, of course, the future Buddha. Maitreya will be the eighth and last to appear in our age. So it makes good sense that both are presented side by side. The Bodhisattva Maitreya is depicted again in the second groups of drawings, very near, also donated by Singhota, but obviously by different artists. If you just keep in mind the shape of the flask, for instance, or the halo, you can see here at once that this looks quite different. You can clearly see there is a sprout on this flask, which was not on the other one, and there are also other differences. Now, luckily, the other figure, this is of course a Maitreya again. This one again is identified here by an inscription which is partly rubbed off, but we can just read homage to the noble Valoki, and that is enough to know that it is Avalokiteshvara, of course. The rest is gone. The crown too is not very clear. It's also a bit worn, so we cannot see whether or not the Buddha Amitabha, whom we expect to sit there, is really present. Now this damage is due to natural causes. It is worn down in course of time. No harm was done to all these pictures for many, many centuries, because after the Buddhist period, the pictures did not mean anything to the people anymore, but luckily they considered them as a work of supernatural beings, of fairies, and so they did not dare to touch them. That is why they are so wonderfully preserved right into our times. But this protection sadly works no longer. Since the rise of Islam in this area during the last 2 decades, local mullahs tend to encourage people to throw stones at the faces of the Buddha, and the small white spots you see all here are the effects. These are the harbingers of a coming disaster when these picture was taken about 20 years ago. Again, here an identification without inscription as Avalokiteshvara would be at least doubtful. Moreover, Singhota, who donated many things, also donated this Bodhisattva Manjushri. According to the inscription, it is identified. So altogether, Singhota most kindly left images of the Buddha Vipashin, of the Bodhisattvas Maitreya, Avalokiteshvara, and Manjushri, all clearly identified either by inscriptions or by their attributes. In contrast, only one bronze from the northwest, though not dated by the Palola Shahis, gives the name of the Buddha, which is very rare. It is unique in all these bronzes, and the name is very surprising. It is not that we say Shakyamuni or something like that, but it is the Buddha Vishwabhu, Buddha nobody normally would know. And looking at this bronze, it is quite obvious that nobody would have ever guessed that this would be Buddha Vishwabhu. Now, who is this Buddha, a new name, a Buddha hardly ever depicted anywhere. In the same way as Vipashyan, whom we met already, he is one of the 7 Buddhas who already appeared in our age, called the Bhadrakalpa, the auspicious age, because 8 Buddhas, Maitreya is of course still expected, do appear in one and the same world age, which is, according to the belief of the Buddhists, quite exceptional. Normally there are many, many ages without any Buddha to appear. Now, how does this evidence gathered from the drawings help to identify the bronzes and the Buddhas and to determine their names? Not too much, because the characteristics of the bronzes and the Buddhas do not repeat themselves. The only exception is the one, this one, is a very early bronze donated by an early king of the Palola Shahi, the only one, by the way, who donated a manuscript and a bronze. That is only this one. This one is, of course, easily identified as an Avalokiteshvara. Here you can see clearly the small Amitabha in his crown. The inscription, which you can also see, only mentions the name of the donor. I do hope that it continues on all sides and perhaps gives a date, but I have to verify that in China, where this is in the Palace Museum in Peking. So this is clearly an Avalokiteshvara and easily and certainly recognized as such. But on the whole, the result from the evidence of the rock drawings is slightly disappointing for our iconography of the bronzes. Therefore, we have to look elsewhere, that is not to images but to Buddhist scriptures, and this proves to be more fruitful. Now coming back to this bronze, which we have seen already donated in the year 19. It was recognized long ago, and probably correctly, that there is a possible connection of this bronze to a very famous Buddhist text, to the Lotus Sutra. In the Lotus Sutra, we can read more than once that the Buddha touches the head of a person who, after the nirvana, would recite for himself, write, venerate, or recite to others the Lotus Sutra. And once it says, the Buddha Shakyamuni will put his hand. So this connection, if this connection between the bronze and between the text is accepted, the second feature of this picture could be explained. If you look carefully, you can see that the Buddha carries in his hand what is a book. This one. What you can see here is the strings that hold the book together. Manuscripts look like this, just to remind you of it. They are held together with strings, which you can see here, and are either on palm leaf or on birch bark. Now, if this is a book, probably the Lotus Sutra is meant, and it is important to note that there are indeed 4 copies extant in the Gilgit library of exactly this text, although none of them is directly connected to the Palola Shahi. This is not the only bronze donated by the Palola Shahis connected to a book. The connection to a book is much more obvious in this piece, which was offered by Sotheby's for sale 5 years ago. The inscription tells us that the bronze was again donated by a queen, one of the early queens, the wife of one of the early rulers in the early 7th century. The really extraordinary feature is the book which this standing lady holds in her left hand, because there is a text inscribed in the book, and wonderfully we can also read this text. That is not always so. There is another example where we cannot read anything, but here it is quite clear. It says, "Homage to the perfection of wisdom." Consequently, this is an image of the perfection of wisdom, or a prajna paramita, one of the 10 perfections which a bodhisattva, a future Buddha, must master before enlightenment. Again, there are 2 prajna paramita manuscripts also in the Gilgit library, but again, unfortunately, not immediately connected to a king. If the interpretation of these bronzes is more or less correct, these 2 examples show something equally fascinating and deeply worrying. The artists working for the Palola Shahis tried to develop their own iconography based on Buddhist scriptures. Therefore, we can observe in some very few examples the formative phase of an original iconography. If this is true, this does not at all facilitate the task of identifying Buddhas and Bodhisattvas iconographically. Still, it was possible so far to find at least some promising ways and means towards a possible identification of some of the bronzes. The really complex pieces, however, resisted any clear identification so far. An example is the bronze, which we have seen already, of the treasurer Shankarasena and his wife Devashri. This very complex composition shows a preaching Buddha that is pretty obvious, indicated by his hands, the position of his hands, but also indicated by the deer sitting here and what is probably meant to be a Dharma chakra, wheel of law in the middle. This clearly points to the deer park at Sanat near Benares, where the Buddha preached for the first time. However, this cannot be meant because the monks are missing and so on. The rest is not in accordance with it. The Buddha sits on a lotus that rises out of water, which is indicated by waves on the pedestal and by the pair of nagas on both sides of the stalk of the lotus. There are two stupas at both sides, and in both stupas there are small Buddhas seen, and that has erroneously induced some scholars to think of the Lotus Sutra again, where it is said that in a stupa, Buddha, the Buddha Prabhuta Ratna, is sitting, and that is revealed by the Buddha Shakyamuni. Now, while this bronze, in this bronze there are two stupas depicted, the Lotus Sutra speaks only of one. And moreover, by sheer good luck, recently, 2 years ago, discovered rock drawing represents exactly the scene as described in the Lotus Sutra. Here you see one stupa and two Buddhas. That the Lotus Sutra is meant indeed is known from the iconography of China, because in Chinese Buddhist art that is very frequent, and the connection to the Lotus Sutra is known. In India or Indian art, it may be a unique piece. So we cannot really understand the iconography of this bronze except for the preaching Buddha. The same seems to be true for this bronze, which we have seen already, the Pritska Buddha. Again, the Buddha is preaching, this time sitting on a throne. Again, he wears a crown, a pearl necklace, and the very typical cape with these tassels hanging down here everywhere. The pair of deer and the wheel of law is also present. You can see them here. To his right side stands Maitreya holding his flask. That is, can see it more clearly here. There is the flask. And to the left side, that is Avalokiteshvara with a small Buddha in his crown, which you can see here very clearly. The artist shaped this figure of the Buddha in exactly the same way as it is done in the bronze of Shankarasena, except for the sitting pose. Still, it is an open question which Buddha is meant. Nevertheless, perhaps we can move a step further in this case than in the case of the previous Buddha, because the inscription might provide us with a hint. The king asked his court poet to compose a simple verse to be inscribed on the pedestal. And in this verse there is a tiny bit of information that might be interesting. It is said, this image of the Muni was made. The important word is Muni, that means sage, and this is the same which of course occurs in Shakya Muni. So it is possible that this hints at Shakya Muni. Theoretically, the second Buddha, Kanaka Muni, would be possible, but he is depicted so rarely that we can rule that out. So with a bit of luck, it really is a Shakya Muni. The highest quality is again present in the last piece to be discussed, and perhaps also the last of these spectacular bronzes ever cast in Bola, Belur or Palola. The Buddha sits cross-legged on a cushion which shows the same pattern as the one on the Nandi Vikramaditya's Buddha. He wears a simple robe of a monk, and we would be inclined to call him a Shakyamuni, which may be correct. However, keeping in mind as a warning the inscription defining a Buddha as Vishwabhu, we should not be overly confident. The Buddha is flanked by two crowned bodhisattvas, and most interesting is the pedestal of this figure. Here, 4 persons, most likely donors, are seen. One of them clearly is a monk. Another one is a musician holding a string instrument in his hand. The lowest register is of particular interest because the artist here displays some playfulness, if not humor, if you look at these lions, particularly this one here or that one over there. That is very unusual to have animals shown this way. Unfortunately, there is no inscription, which is a bit puzzling because the bronze was obviously commissioned by a well-defined group of 4 persons, which you see here. And these persons always gain individuality only by the inscriptions. There are many bronzes with standard donors who cannot be identified. There were no portraits in ancient India, and even King Nandi Vikramaditya, whom you have seen here, would not be recognizable to you if you met him in the lounge later on by the features of his face. He is only defined by the inscription. Now here we have a very unusual combination of 4 persons, which makes us think that these were really 4 persons which should be defined by the inscription, but it is not so. If we want to speculate a bit, we can say that this was perhaps due to the fact that inscriptions were written last when the bronze was donated, and we may speculate that this is indeed the culmination point, but also the end of the bronzes by the Palola Shahis. The end of these pieces with extraordinary craftsmanship can be easily guessed. The dynasty came to an end by 720 or 745 when the expanding Tibetan Empire conquered Bolor or Palola. So this may be the culmination point and the end of the whole thing. Obviously, the Tibetans also were fascinated by these Buddhist bronzes once donated by the Palola Shahis, for they took them to Tibet. And Tibet seems to be the ultimate source of the mostly unknown provenance of all these bronzes, which are today dispersed over private collections, and some are, of course, also in museums. Thus, the history of the Palola Shahis and their art came to an end with the Tibetan conquest, but the history of their fine bronzes continued. The bronzes found their way into Tibet, from where these magnificent pieces are now slowly coming back to us after spending almost a full millennium, if not more, in complete oblivion. Thank you very much. So, well in time.
Impeccable timing. Yes. Just to thank Professor von Hinüber for that very stimulating lecture, the rise and fall of the Palola Shahis, taking us through that Buddhist landscape of those rock-cut inscriptions and Buddha images and stupas and so on. The revelation of the 625 dated painted manuscript cover accompanying the birch bark folios, enormously important early dating in terms of the art of the book that we've been looking at here at the museum and exhibitions over the last 18 months. And the fascinating and very skillful, may I say, unveiling, if you like, of the whole process of the creation of iconography and the way that's linked to patronage and the intersection between text and image making. Professor Fund, thank you very much for a very special evening.